By the early 14th century, the Knights Templar had become a force that even kings could not ignore. Their wealth was immense, their influence pervasive, and their independence nearly absolute. Across France, their fortresses and estates formed a network of power that rivaled any secular lordship. Imagine, if you will, rolling fields dotted with Templar commanders, bustling with armored knights, clerics, and laborers. Their activity so organized it seemed almost mechanical, as though each knight were a cog in a divine machine. Royal coffers frequently leaned on the Templars' resources, for the kings of Europe had long depended upon the order to store treasure, manage loans, and safeguard pilgrims on perilous roads to the Holy Land. Yet, dependence often breeds resentment, and King Philip IV of France, known to history as Philip the Fair, began to perceive the order not as allies, but as rivals. He faced enormous debts from costly wars against England and Flanders, and the sight of the Templars' wealth, gold, land, priceless relics, sparked a dangerous idea. Some historians suggest Philip envied their autonomy, fearing an organization answerable only to the Pope might one day challenge his rule. Others propose his motivations were purely financial, a pragmatic attempt to seize an asset that could fill royal coffers almost overnight. In the fall of 1307, this tension reached a chilling crescendo. Under the pretext of heresy and moral corruption, Philip orchestrated an unprecedented operation, a simultaneous arrest of Templars across France. Sealed orders were distributed in secret, and at dawn on Friday, October 13th, royal officials moved with surgical precision. Imagine Paris waking to the shock of the city's most powerful knights being dragged from their beds, hands bound, their white mantles stained not by battle but by accusation and fear. Grand Master Jacques de Molay and other leaders were seized in the temple, the fortified Parisian headquarters that had once served as a sanctuary and a treasury. What followed was methodical, terrifying, and calculated. Properties were confiscated, records seized, and interrogations conducted under extreme duress, designed to produce confessions confirming Philip's narrative. Some knights, bound and suspended, endured unspeakable torture, their bodies twisted and broken, while sleep deprivation and hunger eroded resistance. Others fled or attempted legal defenses, but Philip's apparatus was merciless, combining law, spectacle, and intimidation to crush opposition. Within days, the seeds of the Templars' downfall had taken root, not on a battlefield in the Holy Land, but in the heart of Europe itself, where kings and popes collided in a deadly game of power and ambition. From one mystery to the next, we now turn to the allegations that would forever stain the order's name. Accusations so shocking they still echo through history, fueling speculation and legend. The charges leveled against the Knights Templar in 1307 were as sensational as they were terrifying, and they struck at the very heart of their identity. Imagine an order of men who had sworn lives of devotion, discipline, and courage now accused of practices so grotesque that even their most loyal followers might tremble at the whispers. Philip IV's government claimed that the Templars engaged in heresy, denying Christ during secret initiation ceremonies, spitting upon the cross, and performing forbidden rituals in the shadows of their fortified halls. They were said to worship idols, partake in corrupt sexual practices, and even venerate a mysterious figure known as Baphomet, an enigma whose very name has sparked centuries of speculation. Some scholars suggest Baphomet was a linguistic distortion of Mahomet, implying supposed Islamic influence, while others propose connections to Gnostic traditions or ancient pagan symbols. Whether true or fabricated, the accusation created a psychological weapon of immense power, painting the order as a secret society of darkness hiding behind a facade of Christian piety. Alongside these more lurid claims were procedural charges. The Templars allegedly abused the sacrament of absolution, engaged in financial corruption, and violated canonical law. These charges, though less shocking to the public, provided the legal scaffolding for Philip's systematic assault on their assets. What made these allegations particularly effective was the use of torture to secure confessions. Knights, accustomed to the brutality of battle, were unprepared for the meticulously applied judicial horrors of medieval France. Suspensions designed to dislocate limbs, foot roasting, starvation, and relentless sleep deprivation broke the strongest wills, producing statements that prosecutors used to validate the narrative of corruption and heresy. Jacques de Mar, the Grand Master, initially confessed under these unbearable conditions. Acknowledging some accusations while denying others, his coerced words broadcast to the public as proof of guilt. Yet, patterns quickly emerged. Regions outside France, where torture was prohibited, saw minimal confessions, suggesting that the evidence was not reflective of reality, but of pain-inflicted compliance. This contrast between forced admissions and genuine denial underscores the manipulation behind the legal machinery, a grim choreography in which the knights were both actors and victims. As the narrative spread, the Templars' image transformed overnight from revered warriors of Christ to villains in the popular imagination, setting the stage for the next phase of their tragic suppression, where even survival required choosing between conscience and life itself. From these accusations, the story deepens, and next we move into the harrowing process of trials, recantations, and executions that would seal the fate of the sacred brotherhood forever. The arrests of the Knights Templar on that fateful October morning of 1307 unfolded with chilling precision, a campaign of coordinated disruption that left no room for escape or resistance. Across the streets of Paris, royal officials carrying sealed orders moved with a quiet menace, their armed escorts enforcing authority and ensuring obedience. While the city awoke, oblivious to the storm descending upon one of Christendom's most powerful institutions, temples, commanderies, and private residences of the order were systematically searched, their treasures seized, and their members dragged from their beds into uncertainty and despair. Grand Master Jacques de Mar, summoned under the pretense of consultations for a new crusade, found himself ensnared in the web of political calculation, alongside senior preceptors and knights scattered across French territory. Within hours, the Templars were imprisoned, their records confiscated, and their assets secured by royal agents who would never relinquish them. Pope Clement V, French-born and beholden to Philip, received word too late to intervene, a fait accompli that left the papacy complicit in the unfolding drama. The strategic brilliance of Philip's operation lay in the simultaneous execution of legal, political, and psychological warfare by framing the arrests as a defense of the faith against heresy. He shielded the crown from accusations of avarice while justifying the seizure of vast wealth accumulated over 2 centuries. Torture followed swiftly, transforming the knightly warriors, seasoned on the battlefield, into victims of systematic cruelty. Techniques designed to dismantle both body and spirit were employed with meticulous regularity, arms dislocated under suspension, feet roasted to blistering pain, and prolonged deprivation of food and sleep eroded the will to resist. Under such duress, even the most stalwart knights, including de Mal, offered confessions, some partial, some coerced, which were then publicized as evidence of the order's corruption. These confessions, however, were geographically limited. Outside France, where judicial torture was prohibited, few admitted wrongdoing, suggesting that the charges were contingent upon coercion rather than truth. The stark contrast between coerced confessions and steadfast denials illustrates the calculated manipulation underlying Philip's campaign, exposing the Templars not only to legal annihilation but to the weaponization of public perception. For the knights, every day in prison became a perilous negotiation between survival and integrity. Each confession a step toward preserving life while sacrificing honor. This phase of their downfall, a blend of intrigue, betrayal, and calculated violence, set the precedent for mass executions, the permanent seizure of assets, and the transformation of the Templar legend into a haunting story of injustice that would echo through centuries. As we move forward, the story intensifies with the grim realities of trial, defiance, and the ultimate fate of the Grand Master and his companions. A chapter that reveals the full scope of political ruthlessness and human suffering. The Templars' imprisonment quickly escalated into a methodical and merciless judicial process, one designed less to seek truth than to ensure compliance and eliminate dissent. Within the cold stone walls of Parisian dungeons, knights who had faced death in battle now confronted a terror of a different kind, slow, relentless, and intimately psychological. Some researchers suggest that the medieval legal system, though cloaked in ritual and piety, was easily manipulated by those with power, turning the accusation of heresy into a tool of political conquest. Torture was applied with surgical precision, dislocated joints, the slow roasting of feet, and prolonged starvation broke the strongest bodies and corroded the human mind, extracting confessions that would later justify the confiscation of the order's immense wealth. The atmosphere inside these dungeons was thick with fear, despair, and the acrid stench of unwashed bodies pressed into tight confines. The silence punctuated by the faint groans of those being interrogated nearby. Jacques de Maule, the Grand Master, endured repeated sessions of torment. His initial confessions, a patchwork of coerced admissions and carefully guarded denials, each one dissected and circulated by royal scribes to construct an appearance of guilt. Outside France, in England, Aragon, and Portugal, the story unfolded differently. Knights interrogated without torture overwhelmingly denied wrongdoing, highlighting the stark contrast between voluntary statements and those wrung from suffering, underscoring the extreme dependence of French authorities on coercion. This strategic brutality was not merely punitive, but deeply performative. Philip's government ensured that every confession, every accusation was amplified to the public, transforming personal torment into a spectacle of moral and religious justification. Families, neighbors, and potential allies watched as the mighty defenders of Christendom were reduced to terrified prisoners, their reputation shattered by propaganda as effective as any battlefield siege. As the weeks passed, the Templars' attempts to resist through legal arguments or procedural challenges were met with renewed torture or permanent silencing, culminating in the horrific mass executions of those who refused to recant. The message was unmistakable. The machinery of royal power could bend even the most disciplined and loyal servants of God to its will. As the surviving knights were dispersed, imprisoned, or absorbed into other institutions under watchful eyes, the order's cohesion fractured irreparably. Yet, amid this systematic destruction, questions lingered about the true nature of the charges, the motivations behind Philip's calculated attack, and the enduring enigma of the Templars themselves. From this abyss of betrayal and suffering, the story moves inexorably toward its climactic moments. The final trial, the public recantation of confessions, and the dramatic execution of Jacques de Molay. Events that would echo through history as both warning and legend, leaving us to wonder how justice and power can so easily become instruments of cruelty as the wheels of royal justice turned relentlessly against the Templars. The once feared warrior monks were now shadows of their former selves, their strength eroded by imprisonment and fear, yet their minds remained a repository of discipline, strategy, and secrets that no torturer could fully extract. Some historians suggest that it was precisely this combination of resilience and vulnerability that made the Templars' final days so compelling, a study in how power can both create and destroy. In the streets of Paris, the arrest and imprisonment of these knights sent ripples through society, a city alive with whispered rumors of blasphemy, secret idols, and heretical rituals. Yet also the silent shock of an elite order brought low. Royal officials meticulously catalogued every property, every document, and every artifact, transforming the Templar network of castles, farms, and financial centers into an open ledger for the crown. A wealth so vast that it could bankroll armies and influence entire economies. Meanwhile, Pope Clement V, ensnared between spiritual authority and political dependency, struggled to assert control over a process that had already taken on a momentum of its own. Some scholars believe his attempts at intervention were constrained by the looming presence of Philip IV, whose soldiers and spies ensured that any papal objection could be neutralized before it reached the knights themselves. The interplay between ecclesiastical authority and secular ambition was on full display. The Templars, accountable to Rome but physically trapped within France, became pawns in a game far larger than themselves. The daily reality of imprisonment was suffocating damp stone corridors, the echo of chains rattling against walls, the bitter taste of meager rations, and the ever-present fear of what the next interrogation might bring. Despite this, some knights found fleeting moments of camaraderie, sharing whispered prayers and fragments of hope, a human defiance that persisted even as despair threatened to dominate. The legal narrative constructed against them painted an image of total corruption, denial of Christ, idol worship, obscene ceremonies, and immoral acts. Yet the consistency of confessions seemed to hinge entirely on coercion rather than factual evidence. Outside France, the relative silence of the Templars in other kingdoms underscored the artificiality of the accusations, highlighting a regional discrepancy that would puzzle historians for centuries. As the royal machinery pressed onward, the question loomed: could a faith-driven organization, built on centuries of discipline and courage, survive a political purge so meticulously orchestrated? The story now edges toward its most infamous chapter, the dramatic and public fate of Jacques de Molay and his closest companions, an execution that would reverberate far beyond Paris and embed the Templars permanently in the collective memory of Europe, leaving us to wonder not only about their guilt or innocence, but about the profound human capacity for power, betrayal, and legend. The climax of the Templars. Tragedy unfolded with a theatrical precision that seemed almost orchestrated by fate itself, as if the cobblestone streets of Paris had been waiting centuries for this final act of horror and spectacle. Jacques de Molay, Grand Master of the Order, along with the preceptor of Normandy and other senior knights, were dragged to a small island in the Seine, the chill of October air biting through their white mantles, now dirtied and worn from imprisonment. Crowds gathered along the riverbanks, murmuring, speculating. Caught between fascination and fear, the scent of smoke and wood mingling with the metallic tents of tension. Philip IV, ever the calculating monarch, ensured that every element conveyed power. The river acting as a natural barrier, the pyre built high to dominate the landscape, and the knights themselves made visible examples of defiance and ultimate vulnerability. Witnesses later described the eerie calm with which the condemned men faced the flames, a dignity born of faith and acceptance. Their voices carrying a final curse that would haunt memory. Jacques de Molay called upon God to judge both King Philip and Pope Clement within the year, words that seemed at once prophetic and desperate. Some chroniclers later noted the chilling coincidence that both men died within months, Philip in a hunting accident and Clement from illness, feeding rumor, superstition, and legend into the fire of the Templars' narrative. This execution transformed what could have been a political suppression into myth, the line between historical fact and moral fable blurring, leaving the Templars' story etched into European consciousness as both cautionary tale and enigmatic legend. The psychological impact of these events cannot be overstated. A once feared military religious order, capable of defending pilgrims and fortresses across continents, reduced to ashes in a river-bound pyre, and yet paradoxically immortalized through that very destruction. For the surviving members scattered across Europe, life became an intricate negotiation between exile, survival, and reluctant integration into other religious orders. Some historians point to the creation of the Portuguese Order of Christ as a rare example of continuity, where former Templars found a vessel for their maritime expertise, guiding explorers along the African coast and across the Atlantic. Their skills repurposed yet indelibly linked to the legacy of the vanished order. Meanwhile, properties and wealth in France were absorbed by the crown, yet echoes of the Templars' influence persisted in banking systems, legal frameworks, and even architectural feats, as castles, round churches, and fortresses remained, silent witnesses to their ingenuity. The dramatic execution, combined with political appropriation, set a precedent that resonated through European courts for centuries. Heresy could be leveraged to seize wealth, enforce obedience, and erase institutional autonomy. And yet, in the collective imagination, the Templar story was far from over. Whispers of hidden treasures, secret knowledge, and surviving knights traveled from the Alps to the British Isles, forming the foundation of myths that would captivate storytellers for generations. From the ashes of their public annihilation, a legend emerged, as enduring as it was mysterious, beckoning us to explore the shadowed corridors of power, faith, and human ambition that shaped the ultimate fall of the holy warriors. From the immediate tragedy of the Templars' execution, we move to the ripples that spread across Europe, subtle yet profound, like a stone dropped into a dark, still pond, each concentric circle carrying questions, fear, and opportunity. The suppression of the order did not merely dissolve an institution. It disrupted economies, altered alliances, and reshaped the relationship between church and state. France, having absorbed vast estates, banking operations, and urban holdings, demonstrated to other monarchs the tangible benefits of eliminating an organization that held wealth beyond royal oversight. Yet elsewhere, in kingdoms such as England, Aragon, Castile, and Portugal, the reaction was far more measured. Edward II initially resisted Philip's tactics, wary of upsetting the balance between royal authority and ecclesiastical deference. Yet papal pressure eventually compelled him to comply, transferring most Templar assets to the ensuring that wealth remained within a religious framework, albeit one more amenable to national control. Portugal's approach proved uniquely adaptive. Under King Denis, the surviving Templars were absorbed into the newly founded Order of Christ, an organization that preserved the essential structure, personnel, and maritime knowledge of the Templars while aligning with Portuguese interests. These knights, formerly bound to the crusading frontiers of the Levant, now directed their discipline and expertise toward navigation, exploration, and colonial expansion, ultimately contributing to voyages that redefined the known world. Spain saw a more fragmented outcome, with Templar properties divided among the orders of Montesa and Santiago, retaining military character yet subordinated to regional priorities, continuing the defense against Muslim enclaves while quietly preserving elements of Templar practice and ritual. Even beyond Iberia, the Templars' techniques, architectural innovation, agricultural management, and financial administration were absorbed by local authorities and religious institutions, leaving a silent imprint on European infrastructure and commerce. Scholars note that the round churches modeled on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, massive fortifications across the Mediterranean, and pioneering banking practices such as letters of credit, escrow arrangements, and international account management survived long after the White Mantles disappeared, integrating into broader societal frameworks. Meanwhile, the story of their demise and the dramatic execution of leaders like Jacques de Maure fueled legends that transcended geography, rumors of secret survival, hidden treasure, and clandestine knowledge traveled from France to Scotland, Switzerland, and remote Atlantic islands. These tales, though often unverifiable, embedded the Templars within the collective imagination, associating them with hidden wisdom, esoteric traditions, and even early Masonic lore. From one mystery to the next, the Templars' influence quietly endured, not through armies or castles, but through the cultural, financial, and symbolic legacies that continued shaping Europe's medieval and early modern landscapes, leaving us to wonder how much of their true knowledge, skill, and secrets survived beyond the flames of the Seine. As we continue tracing the echo of the Templars' fall, it becomes clear that their legacy was far more than bricks, blood, or battle. It was woven into the very fabric of European society, quietly guiding financial systems, military organization, and even cultural imagination. The banking operations pioneered by the Templars, once designed to safely transfer funds for pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land, laid the foundation for early European international finance. Letters of credit, escrow-like mechanisms, and documented transfers allowed nobles and monarchs to move enormous sums without carrying gold across perilous lands, a practice that would later influence Italian banking houses in Florence, Venice, and Genoa. The Templars' expertise in accounting, record-keeping, and secure wealth management demonstrated how religious ideals could intersect with pragmatic efficiency, creating a model that blended spiritual purpose with worldly necessity. Beyond finance, the architectural innovations of the order endured as silent monuments to their presence. Round churches, inspired by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, appear across London, Paris, Tomar, and beyond, echoing sacred geometry and offering a spatial reminder of crusading devotion. Massive fortresses, strategically placed across the Levant and Europe, still dominates landscapes, testaments to an order that understood the strategic importance of location. supply lines, and defensive engineering. Yet perhaps most fascinating is the cultural and symbolic afterlife of the Templars. Tales of hidden treasure, clandestine rituals, and secret knowledge captured imaginations almost immediately after their suppression. Scotland's folklore connects fleeing Templars to Robert the Bruce and the Battle of Bannockburn, claiming that the knight's strategic guidance and wealth tipped the scales in favour of Scottish independence. These stories, though unverifiable, infused the Templars with an aura of mystique, linking them to ideals of loyalty, courage, and forbidden knowledge. In the 18th century, Masonic traditions explicitly adopted Templar symbolism, rituals, and mythology, presenting the knights as guardians of esoteric wisdom, a bridge between medieval chivalric ideals and early modern fraternal societies. Popular culture has carried this fascination further, from historical novels to blockbuster films, games, and conspiracy-driven literature, transforming the white-mantled warriors into enduring icons of mystery, discipline, and hidden power. Their narrative, from humble guardians of pilgrims to international financiers, and from execution by fire to mythic immortality, demonstrates how an institution can leave a legacy far exceeding its operational existence. Even today, scholars uncover insights from trial transcripts, archaeological digs, and regional property records, revealing daily life, organizational practices, and political entanglements previously obscured by legend. As we consider these layers of history, fact, and myth, we are left to ponder, in a world where institutions rise and fall, what is it that allows a story to endure, to transform human imagination, and to persist across centuries as more than memory, but as living, almost tangible presence? Next, we move to the Templars' influence on exploration and the Age of Discovery, a chapter often overlooked but no less remarkable. In Portugal, the remnants of the order found new life as the Order of Christ, retaining not only members but also strategic properties, wealth, and organizational knowledge. Under the stewardship of Prince Henry the Navigator, these resources became the backbone of Portuguese maritime expansion. Ships bearing the distinctive cross of the order sailed into unknown waters, tracing the African coastline, mapping currents and winds, and pioneering navigation techniques that would shape global trade routes for centuries. Some researchers suggest that the Templars' earlier experience protecting pilgrims and managing supply chains in foreign lands may have indirectly informed these voyages, providing a model of disciplined, long-distance operations. The navigational instruments, cartographic knowledge, and logistical planning that accompanied Portuguese exploration owe something to the institutional memory carried forward from the crusading knights. Beyond raw geography, the philosophical and organizational ethos of the Templars' discipline, secrecy, and commitment to a transcendent goal also seeped into these maritime ventures, embedding an almost mystical dedication to purpose in the men who sailed under the Order of Christ's banner. In Spain, the redistribution of Templar assets to orders such as Santiago and Montesa contributed to the final stages of the Reconquista, allowing these new brotherhoods to continue defending Christian territories, while gradually integrating more deeply into national hierarchies. Even as the Templars themselves ceased to exist as a formal entity, the structures they created, castles, fortifications, commanderies, and estates, remained in use, repurposed by secular and ecclesiastical authorities alike. Their architectural imprint, seen in imposing stone fortresses and distinctive round churches, provided both physical and symbolic continuity, a reminder of the organizational genius that once managed lands across continents. Simultaneously, the Templars' approach to finance influenced emerging banking systems in Italy, where innovations such as credit instruments, trust-based transactions, and ledger management became standard practice, laying the groundwork for modern international finance. In cultural terms, their dramatic suppression, legends of hidden treasures, and whispers of forbidden knowledge continued to captivate European imagination, blending fact and myth into a narrative almost impossible to disentangle. From secretive ritual practices to alleged survival in remote lands, every element added layers to their story, ensuring that the Templars would never truly vanish from collective memory. As we move forward, we must ask, if an organization can leave a mark so pervasive without existing for centuries, what does that say about the nature of influence, the persistence of myth, and the way history chooses its immortals? From maritime exploration and financial ingenuity, we turn to the Templars' architectural and material legacy, a silent testimony to their once formidable presence. Across Europe and the Near East, the remnants of their fortresses, commanderies, and churches speak of a sophisticated organization capable of harmonizing military, religious, and economic objectives. Their round churches, modeled after the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, were not mere architectural flourishes, but deliberate symbols linking their mission to the Sacred Heart of Christendom. Imagine entering one of these stone circles, the cool, uneven flagstones underfoot, the echo of footsteps amplified in vaulted chambers, the faint scent of centuries-old incense lingering in cracks of mortar, a tangible bridge between the living and the legendary. Beyond aesthetic design, these structures functioned as fortified centers of administration, training, and refuge, allowing a relatively small number of men to exert control over vast territories. In the Levant, massive fortifications along pilgrimage routes and frontier towns served dual purposes: defense against hostile forces and the projection of moral and spiritual authority. The sheer scale of some castles, with concentric walls, towering keeps, and complex inner courtyards, conveys an almost overwhelming sense of strategic sophistication. In Scotland, England, and France, Templar estates often included chapels, granaries, stables, and barns, reflecting a meticulous approach to sustaining both human and material resources. Researchers suggest that the layout of these estates and the integration of agricultural, religious, and military functions may have inspired later monastic and military architectural planning, a subtle, enduring influence of their design philosophy. Their surviving structures also reveal practical ingenuity: concealed storage rooms for treasure, hidden passages for defense, and watchtowers positioned for maximum visibility over surrounding lands. Even in ruins, the Templars' architectural footprint communicates a story of organization, foresight, and discipline. But perhaps the most haunting aspect is what remains unseen: the countless daily routines, whispered commands, and disciplined rituals that once filled these spaces with purpose, now lost to time yet preserved in stone and story. This blend of tangible and intangible heritage illustrates how the Templars' presence extended beyond immediate military or financial power, embedding themselves in landscapes, culture, and memory. As we reflect on these enduring monuments, one cannot help but wonder how much of the Templars' essence persists not in texts or treasures, but in the silent echoes of corridors they once walked, the shadows of walls that once contained secrets no one else could see. What mysteries still linger, hidden in plain sight, waiting for eyes willing to perceive them? Having wandered through the physical remnants of the Templars, we now drift into their financial ingenuity, a domain as invisible as it was revolutionary. Picture medieval Europe, fragmented territories, local lords demanding tribute, pilgrims journeying through hostile lands, and kings perpetually strapped for cash after costly campaigns. Into this chaotic landscape stepped the Knights Templar, not only as warriors, but as financial architects. They developed early banking methods, issuing letters of credit that allowed pilgrims to deposit funds in one commandery and withdraw them safely at another, effectively creating a network that spanned continents. Some historians suggest this system reduced robbery and loss on dangerous routes, while others speculate it may have been the first form of international banking as we understand it today. Beyond the pilgrim networks, the Templars acted as custodians of royal treasures, managing deposits for kings and nobles, lending money to fund wars, and even overseeing tax revenues. Imagine entering a Templar vault in Paris. Thick oak doors reinforced with iron, walls lined with chests, parchment rolls meticulously catalogued, and a hush pervading the room, broken only by the quiet shuffle of armored feet. Their ledgers, surviving in fragments, reveal a sophisticated understanding of accounts, credits, and liabilities, demonstrating methods remarkably modern in comparison to contemporaneous financial practices. The wealth accumulated through these operations made them a target, not merely for envy but for political expediency, particularly when monarchs like Philip IV of France faced pressing fiscal crises. Some researchers argue that it was this very financial prominence that precipitated their downfall, creating a tempting prize for ambitious rulers who framed accusations of heresy to justify confiscation. Yet, beyond the politics, the Templars' financial systems laid foundations for subsequent commercial networks across Europe. Italian banking houses, for example, absorbed many operational principles pioneered by the order: credit instruments, secure transfers, and the notion of centralized oversight across dispersed branches. Even more intriguingly, these innovations illustrate how religious institutions could wield economic power without sacrificing spiritual identity, a paradox that fascinated contemporaries and historians alike. But as we trace the flow of their golden documents, we are left with questions. How much of the Templars' financial brilliance was purely practical, and how much was intertwined with secrecy, trust, and the mystique surrounding their order? Did these networks contain hidden knowledge meant only for the initiated, or were they simply an early demonstration of organizational genius? And perhaps the most tantalizing thought of all, in the quiet corners of forgotten vaults, could remnants of their strategies, records, or treasures still lie, waiting to whisper their secrets to those bold enough to uncover them? From the quiet hum of financial corridors, we move to the architecture that bore witness to the Templars' presence. Fortresses and churches that still speak in stone and shadow. Close your eyes and imagine a round church in London or Paris, its walls echoing footsteps centuries later, modeled meticulously after the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. The round form itself was deliberate, symbolic, a bridge between the sacred geography of the Holy Land and European soil, an architectural mantra repeating devotion and authority. Castle fortifications, sprawling across Europe and the Levant, offered another form of presence: thick curtain walls, imposing keeps, moats cutting across landscapes, and arrow slits framing distant horizons. Within these walls, knights trained, prayed, counted coins, and planned crusades, their daily routines framed by both piety and martial discipline. Some researchers believe the spatial design of Templar fortresses reflected not only defense, but also control and organization, translating spiritual hierarchy into physical space. Others suggest the layout of these structures, often including hidden chambers and underground passages, concealed both treasure and secrets, a testament to the secretive aura that surrounded the order. Imagine standing inside a dimly lit hall, light filtering through high windows, the scent of wood and stone mingling with the faint tang of metal from armor racks. Beyond aesthetics, these constructions were engineering marvels of the medieval world. Their masonry techniques, strategic siting on hills or near waterways, and integrated defensive systems demonstrate an understanding of logistics, surveillance, and psychological impact that extended far beyond simple military needs. Even today, archaeological studies reveal clever water cisterns, hidden staircases, and spaces designed for both rapid defense and prolonged siege, indicating foresight that some historians describe as remarkably modern. Yet, in the quiet corners of these buildings, we also encounter mystery, chambers whose original purpose remains contested, inscriptions whose meanings are debated, and cryptic symbols etched into stones that have survived centuries of weather and war. Some scholars argue these were purely ceremonial or functional, while others suggest esoteric knowledge was embedded within their walls, a silent testament to the Templars' hidden wisdom. And as we wander through these spaces in imagination, questions arise that will haunt our exploration. What truths, what secrets, and what treasures remain hidden in these structures, silently defying the passage of time? Could the very walls themselves have preserved echoes of rituals, strategies, or knowledge that never survived in parchment or confession? From one shadowed hall to another, the Templars' architectural legacy remains both tangible and enigmatic, a physical manifestation of their dual existence as warriors and mystics. From stone and mortar, we shift to the invisible currents of finance that flowed through the Templars' hands, a network that transformed the medieval economy in ways few could fully comprehend at the time. Picture vast ledgers filled with meticulous entries, the scratch of quills echoing in candlelit halls, recording deposits, loans, and transfers that crossed kingdoms and continents. Their banking system was revolutionary, offering a level of security and trust rare in an era rife with bandits and political upheaval. Merchants, nobles, and even kings entrusted the Templars with their wealth, confident in their discipline and discretion. Some historians describe the Templar banking network as the earliest model of an international financial system, with mechanisms resembling modern credit letters, escrow accounts, and cross-border transfers. Others suggest their success lay in the combination of spiritual authority and operational secrecy. A knight monk's vow to God provided a moral backbone to a system that demanded absolute reliability. Imagine a noble family in France, handing over a chest of gold, knowing that across the Alps, in a distant fortress, their wealth would be preserved and made accessible when needed, sometimes in exchange for letters of credit secured by the order. The Templars also acted as intermediaries for monarchs, storing treasures, funding campaigns, and even underwriting loans for wars. This financial expertise, however, came with visibility and, ultimately, vulnerability. Philip IV of France, deep in debt from expensive military campaigns, looked upon the Templars' wealth with both envy and calculated intent. The crown's growing dependence on the order for fiscal support shifted into resentment, feeding the narrative that would justify their downfall. Beyond mere coin, the The Templars' financial acumen reshaped commerce and trust in medieval society. Some researchers argue that without their innovations, the growth of long-distance trade and the emergence of early banking systems in Italy might have been delayed by decades. Others highlight the moral tension. Monks entrusted with spiritual duties engaging in profit-driven enterprises, a duality that would later be exploited by critics and persecutors. Yet the sophistication of their system is undeniable, reflecting an organization capable of managing resources with precision, foresight, and discretion. Even today, traces of Templar financial practices can be traced in early European banking principles, from letters of credit to secure fund transfers across hostile or distant lands. But with all their meticulous planning and divine oaths, one question lingers in the shadows. Could such a network of wealth and influence, designed to survive centuries, truly be vulnerable to human greed and political ambition? And as we consider this, the next chapter in their story unfolds, where money, power, and betrayal collide in ways that will reshape the destiny of the Order. Forever next we move from the quiet precision of Templar finance to the thunderous clash of swords and the relentless discipline of their battlefield presence, where courage met strategy in ways that inspired awe and fear across Europe and the Holy Land. Imagine the morning light glinting off white mantles emblazoned with red crosses, the sound of hooves striking packed earth as knights mounted, lances poised, shields interlocked, forming an impenetrable phalanx. These men were more than warriors. They were monks bound by faith, sworn to protect pilgrims and holy sites with a devotion that blurred the line between piety and martial skill. Some contemporaries describe the Templars as both terrifying and almost otherworldly, their training so rigorous that even seasoned adversaries whispered of their near-superhuman coordination in battle. They constructed fortifications that were marvels of engineering, towering stone keeps, thick walls, and strategically placed watchtowers, designed to hold out against sieges that would crumble lesser garrisons. Their military innovation extended to logistics, ensuring that supply lines remained secure across deserts and mountains, an achievement that required foresight, discipline, and unshakable morale. Yet, for all their strength, the battlefield revealed vulnerabilities that would mirror their later political trials, dependence on shifting alliances, and the relentless tide of enemies who learned and adapted to their methods. In the Holy Land, the Templars defended key strongholds against waves of adversaries, often outnumbered and isolated, yet their reputation for tenacity spread like wildfire, inspiring both respect and fear. Some scholars argue that their success derived as much from psychological warfare as from brute strength, with the mere sight of a disciplined Templar force enough to unsettle opponents before the first lance struck. Others suggest that their religious devotion gave them a sense of invulnerability, a belief that divine favor would shield them from mortal peril, a conviction that infused every maneuver with a calculated intensity. As the crusades ebbed and flowed, these knights became symbols of a fragile Christian foothold, their victories and losses intertwined with the fate of entire regions. Their battlefield prowess was legendary, yet it also made them indispensably and, therefore, vulnerable to the politics of kings and popes, a duality that would later seal their fate. And so, as the dust settles on imagined battlefields and echoes of war fade into history, a darker story emerges, one of intrigue and betrayal within the very courts that once lauded their heroism, setting the stage for the catastrophic events that would bring this formidable order to its knees. From the roar of battle, we shift to the hush of the Templar chambers, where strategy, secrets, and daily rituals intertwined to form the invisible backbone of their power. Picture the dimly lit halls of a Templar commandery, stone walls echoing with the shuffle of sandaled feet, the low murmur of prayers mingling with the scratch of quills on parchment. Here, knights who had faced death in open fields turned their focus to administration, to the careful management of estates, treasuries, and correspondence that spanned continents. Their vaults, reputed to rival royal coffers, were meticulously organized, holding gold, silver, precious relics, and detailed records of donations from monarchs and nobles, each coin a testament to influence and trust. Some researchers believe that their banking innovations, letters of credit, deposit networks, and early forms of checks enabled nobles to travel with minimal risk, transforming the way wealth moved across Europe. Others suggest that the Templars' financial acumen made them indispensable to kings and popes alike. Yet it also made them a target, their vast assets a temptation for rulers struggling to fund wars or settle debts. Beyond finance, these quiet halls were arenas of internal discipline, where novices learned the strict code of obedience, humility, and secrecy that bound the order. Rituals carried weight far beyond mere ceremony, oaths sworn before the cross, nightly prayers, and silent contemplation cultivated a unity that made the Templars both formidable and insular. Yet, this very isolation fed rumors, whispered suspicions that would later be weaponized against them. Some chronicles hint at secret initiations and symbolic acts, misunderstood, deliberately misrepresented by outsiders. Others argue that the aura of mystery was a necessary tool, a form of psychological armor that reinforced loyalty and obedience. The combination of visible power in the field and invisible mastery behind closed doors created a paradox. An organization celebrated for courage and service, yet envied, mistrusted, and increasingly seen as independent of any earthly authority. And while the knights worked tirelessly to maintain their network of estates, fortresses, and influence, a storm was quietly gathering beyond their walls, a convergence of greed, fear, and ambition that would exploit every strength and every shadow of secrecy. As we leave the echoing halls and step into the political intrigue that would seal their destiny, one question lingers: how could such disciplined, devoted men, guardians of kings and popes, be brought down so completely by forces that were, in essence, human? Next, we move from the quiet corridors of Templar commanderies to the streets of Paris, a city awakening to a dawn unlike any other on Friday, October 13th, 1307. Imagine the fog lifting off the Seine, the clatter of carts, the cries of merchants, unaware that a calculated storm was about to sweep through their city. Royal officials, bearing sealed orders from King Philip IV, moved with almost supernatural precision, their footsteps measured, their intent lethal. Armed guards flanked couriers, ensuring no knight of the Holy Order could flee or resist. From one darkened alley to another, the elite of the Templar hierarchy were seized, including Grand Master Jacques de Maille, who only hours earlier had walked freely through Paris, negotiating yet another crusading proposal with unwavering confidence. The arrests were swift, surgical, and absolute. A network of power dissolved in a single day, properties locked down, records confiscated, and knights imprisoned. Some researchers suggest that Philip's motives were rooted purely in financial desperation, his coffers depleted by war and extravagant royal projects, with the immense Templar wealth presenting an irresistible opportunity. Others propose a more intricate web of political calculation. The order's autonomy challenged the king's vision of centralized authority. Their allegiance to the Pope undermined his control over French territories, and their vast privileges set precedents that threatened monarchical dominance. Guillaume de Nargaret, Philip's chief minister and legal strategist, orchestrated the campaign with ruthless efficiency, crafting a narrative of heresy so compelling that even papal intervention was effectively neutralized. Allegations of secret ceremonies, idol worship, and unspeakable acts among the knights created a scandalous tableau, designed to shock the public and erode sympathy for the accused. The mysterious Baphomet, invoked as evidence of hidden apostasy, added an aura of dark mystique that even the most loyal adherents could scarcely counter in the court of public opinion. Within weeks, torture was employed systematically, stretching men accustomed to battlefield suffering into realms of unimaginable anguish. Confessions were extracted under extreme duress, some partial, some complete, and each carefully publicized to reinforce the narrative of guilt. Even as a few knights recanted, claiming innocence and exposing the coercion behind their statements, the machinery of royal prosecution pressed on, relentless and unyielding. The streets of Paris, once witness to solemn processions and bustling commerce, had become a stage for judicial theatre, a grim demonstration of how power, fear, and meticulous planning could crush even the most storied and sacred of institutions. And as the sun set over the city, the question remained suspended in the smoky, torchlit air. How would the world respond to an order destroyed not on the battlefield, but by the subtle, pervasive forces of law, money, and ambition? From the streets of Paris, we moved to the grim chambers where the Templar knights endured a fate no battlefield could prepare them for. A slow unspooling of suffering and despair that would echo through history. Imagine cold, stone cells, damp with the lingering chill of early morning, the scent of unwashed bodies and flickering candle wax, a heavy silence broken only by the occasional shuffling of guards or the anguished whispers of men trained in war and prayer alike. Here, under the watchful eyes of royal torturers, the knights faced excruciating methods designed to break body and spirit, suspension from iron hooks, dislocation of shoulders, the cruel roasting of feet over open flames, endless deprivation of sleep and sustenance. Some researchers believe these techniques were applied universally to ensure compliance. Others suggest selective severity, targeting leaders to force confessions that could validate Philip's carefully constructed legal narrative. Within days, the confessions arrived, scripted by pain and fear, used to justify the heresy charges that would cement the order's downfall. Jacques de Maure, initially yielding under torment, recanted repeatedly, insisting on innocence, only to witness his fellow knights crushed, broken, or executed before his eyes. The public spectacle reached its devastating climax on that fateful day in March 1314, when D'Aumale and the preceptor of Normandy were brought to Notre Dame for sentencing. Imagine the air thick with smoke and murmurs, the weight of history pressing down as the men, standing tall despite suffering, recanted their coerced confessions, proclaiming the sacred brotherhood innocent of all charges. The reaction was immediate and merciless. Philip declared them relapsed heretics, and without further trial, they were led to a small island in the Seine, the flames consuming them as witnesses watched in stunned silence. Legend claims Jacques de Maule's final words were a curse upon those responsible, summoning both king and pope to divine judgment within a year. Remarkably, Both Philip and Clement died within months, feeding the narrative of prophecy fulfilled, intertwining fact with myth, justice with vengeance. Beyond France, the repercussions spread across Europe. English and Iberian monarchs struggled with papal directives, some transferring Templar properties to the Hospitallers, others innovating, as in Portugal, where the Order of Christ preserved members and structure, quietly continuing missions that would later fuel maritime exploration. From the ashes of suppression, the Templars' influence endured in finance, architecture, military organization, and even cultural memory, leaving behind not just stories of martyrdom, but practical legacies of banking, fortification, and institutional innovation. And yet, even centuries later, the flickering shadows of their trials and executions linger. A haunting question in every ruined commandery, every stone-round church, every whispered legend: how could an order so disciplined, so devoted, fall so completely to the unseen forces of politics, wealth, and fear? And so we arrive at the final chapter of the Templar story, a conclusion that is less an ending than a transformation, a shift from the tangible world of knights, castles, and crusades to the intangible realm of legend, symbolism, and cultural memory. Sit back, relax, and imagine the quiet after the storm. The white mantles that once gleamed in sunlight on distant Crusader roads now vanished. The commanderies empty, the treasures scattered. Yet echoes of discipline, devotion, and secrecy lingered in every stone, every manuscript, every whispered tale. Across Europe, the order's dissolution rippled outward in unpredictable ways. Some former knights assimilated into other religious orders, lending their expertise to defensive campaigns in the Mediterranean or Iberia. Others vanished into obscurity, carrying knowledge of banking, fortification, and navigation into new enterprises, their influence hidden but potent. In Portugal, the Order of Christ arose almost like a phoenix from Templar ashes, preserving continuity of personnel and mission, later funding voyages that would redefine global geography, carrying explorers along African coasts and into the Atlantic, their ships bearing a cross that echoed the Templar legacy. In Spain, resources flowed into military religious institutions like Santiago and Montesa, which continued to defend Christian territories and eventually participated in the final reconquest of Granada. Even in territories where the order was officially suppressed, the physical traces of their work endured: round churches modeled after the Holy Sepulchre, imposing castle fortifications from Syria to Scotland, archival records documenting financial innovations that informed the rise of Italian banking, credit systems, and early international finance. Some historians suggest that without the Templars' pioneering work, much of European commercial and military infrastructure might have developed more slowly, while others emphasize the symbolic resonance of their story, the tension between religious idealism and worldly power, between devotion and ambition, between secrecy and exposure. And then there is the cultural afterlife, from medieval legends of surviving knights fleeing to Scotland or remote Atlantic islands to modern appearances in books, films, and video games, from Freemasonry's claimed connections to esoteric wisdom to global fascination with hidden treasure and forbidden knowledge. The story of the Templars persists, not only because of their dramatic rise and catastrophic fall, but because it embodies universal questions: how power corrupts, how devotion is tested, how history is written by victors, and how myth can preserve truths that records obscure. So, as you drift towards sleep, imagine the flicker of torchlight across ancient stone walls. the silent corridors where knights once prayed and planned. The distant seas charted by those who carried Templar knowledge into new worlds. The order may have fallen, yet in memory, in legend, in enduring structures of finance, fortification, and ritual, the Knights Templar remain with us, a mystery as enduring as the flame of justice and injustice that consumed them. A reminder that even in defeat, influence can transcend time. And the past, with all its shadows, still whispers to the present. Close your eyes and imagine the soft crackle of a distant torch, burning somewhere inside a stone corridor built nearly 1,000 years ago. Imagine the air cool, dry, carrying the faint scent of old parchment and iron. Tonight, as you fall asleep, we step quietly into the long, winding story of the Knights Templar. A story woven from faith, ambition, silence, and mystery. A story whispered across deserts, carved into fortress walls, and carried through the centuries by rumor, legend, and fear. So lie back, let your breathing slow, and let the past draw closer. Because our journey begins not with a war or a king but with a question. What kind of men would abandon everything to become warriors of God? Some believe it began with a calling, an irresistible pull felt by a handful of knights in the early 1100s. Others suggest it was born from chaos. The Crusader states were fragile, dangerous, and soaked in shifting alliances. But whatever the truth, in the year 1119, 9 men rode toward the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, seeking permission to form a new brotherhood, one that mixed monastic vows with military discipline. They called themselves the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. Later, the world would call them the Knights Templar. Picture their arrival, armored figures standing under the burning sun, their cloaks stained with dust, their horses restless beneath them. Imagine the stillness as King Baldwin II, ruler of Jerusalem, agreed to give them quarters within the ancient ruins believed to be linked to King Solomon. And imagine the silence when they took their vows: poverty, chastity, obedience, swearing their lives to something greater than themselves. Some historians argue this moment changed the course of medieval history. Others believe these knights were simply products of their time, shaped by danger and devotion. But one thing is certain, from this quiet, humble beginning, something vast was awakening. Something that would grow beyond borders, beyond kings, beyond even the church itself. As the years passed, whispers spread across Europe of a new order of warrior monksmen who lived with discipline sharper than their swords, who rode without fear, who blended the solitude of prayer with the violence of battle. And tonight, as you drift deeper into the story, let that image settle in your mind. A small brotherhood, living in the shadow of ancient stones, unaware that they were about to become legends. Because in our next section, we move from their beginnings to the world that needed them so desperately, from the quiet corridors of their first humble quarters. The Knights Templar quickly found themselves thrust into a world alive with danger, devotion, and opportunity. The Holy Land was a place of extremes, blistering heat in the day, freezing cold at night, the scent of incense mingling with the tang of blood and sand. Pilgrims traveled roads that twisted through rocky passes and dense forests, always under the threat of bandits or raiding armies. It was here that the Templars first earned their reputation. Some accounts describe their patrols as silent and relentless, the faint echo of horses' hooves on stone roads announcing an order both feared and revered. Others suggest that their discipline was near obsessive, knights rising before dawn, chanting prayers as they polished armor, checked weapons, and trained tirelessly. They were more than soldiers, they were guardians of faith, custodians of wealth, and shadows on the peripheries of Christendom. Yet their rise was not only born of courage. It was intertwined with politics, intrigue, and the fragility of the Crusader states. European nobles poured treasure into Jerusalem, funding fortresses and religious institutions, trusting the Templars to safeguard both pilgrims and their riches. Some researchers believe this combination of martial skill and financial acumen made them indispensable. Others suggest it was precisely this power that would sow the seeds of envy and suspicion. Their early victories were impressive, yet methodical. Small garrisons defended mountain passes. Convoys of pilgrims reached the sacred city unharmed, and fortified positions seemed to appear as if conjured by strategy alone. Over time, the Templars evolved from a small brotherhood into a pan-European organization, their influence spreading from the streets of Paris to the hills of Portugal. From Scottish highlands to the banks of the Nile, some contemporaries called them the invisible hand of Christendom, silently shaping events behind the scenes. And yet, even as they expanded, shadowed whispers began to follow them. Rumors of secret ceremonies, strange symbols, and rituals that outsiders could not understand. The Order's rapid accumulation of wealth, privileges, and autonomy made them both respected and feared, a paradox at the heart of every great institution. And so, as the Templars' banners fluttered over castles and temples, the world started to notice not just their bravery, but the independence they wielded. This independence, a mark of their early glory, would eventually mark the beginning of their peril. The stage was being set for a drama that would unfold across 2 continents, involving kings, popes, and a legal system that could be bent to any will. And as you sink further into the story, let yourself feel the tension of those early years, a brotherhood rising under the sun and shadow, on roads lined with danger, unaware that the seeds of both greatness and doom were already sown. Next, we move to the Templars' extraordinary transformation into an international power, and the wealth and influence that would one day become a curse. As the Knights Templar expanded across Europe, their presence became impossible to ignore. From the fortified banks of the Seine to the rolling hills of the Iberian Peninsula, their influence was growing, quietly but unmistakably. They built imposing stone fortresses, some shaped with rounded chapels echoing the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, standing as symbols of both faith and strategic dominance. The architecture itself seemed designed to awe, thick walls that absorbed the sun's heat by day and radiated it by night, towers from which a single watchman could observe leagues of surrounding terrain, and hidden chambers whose purposes sparked endless speculation. Their uniforms' white mantles, emblazoned with the Red Cross, were as much a statement of identity as they were a tool of psychological warfare. Witnesses spoke of knights moving like shadows through the fog of early morning, their horses' hooves muffled against the damp cobblestones, a silent promise that no threat would go unnoticed. But beyond the martial presence lay an intricate network of banking, logistics, and political maneuvering that made them unrivaled in influence. European nobles entrusted treasures to the Templars, relying on them not only for physical security, but also for financial stewardship. Some scholars argue that their system of letters of credit and safe deposit vaults were a precursor to modern banking, a network spanning kingdoms, papal states, and trade hubs. Others suggest it was their very control over money that marked the beginning of envy, suspicion, and fear among kings and rivals alike. While they were respected for their discipline, courage, and religious devotion. Whispers began to follow them across the continent, rumors of secret oaths, concealed ceremonies, and rites that outsiders could never fully comprehend. Some chroniclers hinted at mystical practices, others at political scheming, yet few could separate fact from legend. Their autonomy, once a shield in the Holy Land, became a target in Europe, for kings grew wary of a force beholden to no one but the Pope. The Templars' rise was thus double-edged. Each victory, each fortress built, each coin managed, solidified their power while simultaneously attracting the attention of rulers whose ambitions were far less pious. As you sit back and imagine their sprawling commanderies, bustling with knights, scribes, and acolytes, consider the delicate balance they maintained between devotion and worldly power. And yet, as their coffers swelled and their reach extended, the stage was quietly being set for one of the most dramatic betrayals in history. A web of intrigue, envy, and ambition began to form around them, one that would unravel everything they had built. Next, we move to the growing tension between the Templars and the French crown. A relationship destined to erupt into a calculated, devastating betrayal.